Hello, everybody, and welcome to another anniversary of what was one of the worst terror attacks that the world has ever seen. And it's really important that we continue to mark this day. Some people were wondering. A friend of mine asked me, why move on? And I guess it's such a horrible thing that happened to us as a nation that one does feel the need to move on, and it's painful to even remember it, especially those who have lost people. And I'm of course one of those people who also, as some of you may know, I have a background in hotels, so a lot of the people I knew were trapped in the two hotels. The staff, the employees. One of my students died in the attacks, and I recall watching the attacks live for 3 whole days and feeling complete impotence and helplessness. But that was my feeling as a citizen, as an individual who did not have that span of control to really do anything or make a difference. And that frustration lived with me. And of course, I exorcised it to some extent through my writing work, like in the film Kahani, which was based on a terror attack. And a vigilante sort of theme. So that was how I dealt with the aftermath of this terrible tragedy. Subsequently, of course, there has been a lot of political commentary on it. Uh, Most recently, Manish Tiwari, the senior political leader from the Congress party, has published a book in which he has criticized his own government for a certain amount of inaction and placidity, one would say, when it came to a response to these attacks. And I felt that it's important to discuss this, not necessarily because one wants to get into the political back and forth, but primarily because one should analyze what went wrong, what are the cues we missed out on, how we could have responded, and since terror remains an even greater threat today than it was 13 years ago, how should we move ahead and go forward? So I know worlds changed dramatically after this 26/11 attack. I know hoteliering changed dramatically in this country post these attacks. And I'm delighted that I'm joined by two people who keep a very close eye on national security, who track terror, who track defense preparedness, and also the way countries respond to this kind of terror attack. In that sense, we are not alone. Many other nations face this and continue to be challenged by it. So joining me today is, of course, defense expert Abhijit Iyer-Mitra from New Delhi, and Professor Dipankar Sengupta from Jammu University. Thank you, both of you, for joining me on what is a very serious topic. And let's dive right into it. Let's start with really, 26/11. We ask this often about 9/11. I want to know from the both of you, where were you when you heard about the 26/11 attacks?
Should I go first?
Abhijit, sure.
Always.
Um, I was at my mom's house in Madras. I'd come home for a holiday, and it was, initially it started off with reports of firing at Leopold or Britannia, one of those places, I forget now. And I was like, this must be some kind of a, typical Mumbai gang shootout gone berserk kind of thing. But then within about an hour and 45 minutes, when there were reports of multiple shootings all over the place, I kind of knew this was a terror attack happening out there. And you just sense these things, ki kya ho raha hai karke. And of course, the news wasn't saying it was a terror attack. I mean, there was still no clarity on what it was. But at that point, there were several things that you instinctively feel. One, that it's a terror attack. Second, it's a very major terror attack. For example, by that time, I knew that the casualty rate is going to go through the roof. And number three, what I was fairly certain about was the Indian response was going to be extremely, well, what's the word for it? Lackadaisical, for want of a better word. And that's pretty much what happened.
What about you, Professor? Where were you? I remember I was at the Taj Mahal in New Delhi,
Oh,
at
no,
the
I was
on
in.
the rooftop, when I
Uh,
heard about these shots ringing out. And like Abhijit, I thought it was some sort of gang drug warfare going on the streets. But go ahead, Professor.
I was in Jammu, of course, taking my classes. We heard these rumors, but then Jammu Kashmir is a place where you have the first instinct is to uh, disbelieve what you hear, because there's a lots of people saying a lots of things about about lots of issues. So when we heard कि बहुत बड़ा कुछ हो गया है, I said, कितना बड़ा हुआ है, and because I was busy doing other things, and as things kept coming in, I disbelieved them more and more, because I thought this was the typical rumor adding to rumor that goes on in Jammu and Kashmir. So
Hmm.
I didn't believe it at all. Till, of course, I went home very late in the day, and then it was absolutely clear it was a terror attack. As for the response, I knew it would be a tepid response. Why did I know it? Because remember, in those days, we were going through a very woke phase in all aspects, be it economics, be it national security, etc. And I remember because the first interview that I heard, this interview was conducted by a journalist who also sometimes doubles up as a Madison Square boxer, and he was interviewing a security person of the a retired member of the intelligence services.
Hmm.
And remarkably, the first thing that the gentleman said, this is in 2000 and, late 2008, 2009, 2008 was it? Yeah. And where he says, actually, it's the India government which is at fault, the previous India government. And that may have well have been the case. But the first thing I would do is to comment on the attack at hand than to appropriation blame. But
Hmm.
such was the mood and such was governance in those days that this statement came to me as no surprise, and I knew that our response, if at all, would be tepid, and subsequently whatever happened proved that our response was indeed tepid. It was actually more than tepid, it was perverse, but I think we'll talk about that later.
Hmm. No, I mean, for me, I kind of didn't take it too seriously, but because I'm connected to the world of hotels, and I was at the Taj where I had previously worked, I knew people. And then it became like really clear to me that something had happened. First, I heard about the Taj happening. Then I heard about the shots ringing out at the Oberoi. And that really rattled me because my very close friend and batchmate was the front office manager at the Oberoi. And it was the time when he worked. And I had two phones, and I remember one was a personal phone, one was an official phone. I don't know why I did that. It was totally confusing. But his number was on my other phone, which was at home. So I literally drove home. I left whatever I was doing and I stepped on the gas and I drove home and called him. And luckily, that very morning, he had left for Udaipur for a family wedding, but he flew back the next day because a lot of his team was caught up in that attack. And that's what you do in a situation like this when you're the leader. But I remember it just rattling me to the core and being hooked to the television and really wondering, what next. The other thing that sort of stands out for me was that NSG plane that was sitting on the tarmac for the longest time. And I was not that into politics or current affairs. My life was very different. I was writing, of course, but I was not really tracking all these things to that extent. I think 2611 changed that for me in a very profound way. But that NSG plane that was sitting on that tarmac, it just was driving me crazy. I want you all to talk about that plane. Abhijit, starting with you.
So, that plane was kind of a microcosm of everything that was wrong at that point of time in our security management, right? Trying to get permissions for it to land, working out the jurisdiction at any given point of time. See, in America, these things are automatic. The FBI doesn't come in where the state, if there's an interstate crime, it automatically becomes FBI jurisdiction. If there is a certain scale, then it automatically becomes a sort of FBI jurisdiction and things like that. Here you don't. And the reason, within the first 2 hours, I had decided that the response was going to be crap. Sorry to use that word, but it was crap. And even if it happens today, it is going to continue to be crap, incidentally, is because, do you remember our response to the IC-814 hijacking? Right? Its tires should have been shot out, or they
Yes.
should have placed spikes on the runway at Amritsar or Chandigarh, wherever it was that it landed. They did not. And mind you, we still don't have provisions for it. You still don't have commandos training for a situation like that. Okay. So even today, you do not have the provisions to do any of this urban counterinsurgency. They could launch another attack tomorrow, and your response will be none the better. Your Mumbai police is, of course, racked by corruption. It was racked by corruption then. It is racked by corruption now. Parambir Singh, I saw a news report in Times of India today saying Parambir Singh took the phone, Ajmal Kasab's phone, and he never returned it. He never put it into the lockup or whatever, into police custody. Okay. So remember, Mumbai police is the, if you think of Brahma and his three faces, think of a Brahma with four faces, and or a Rakshasa with four faces. Mumbai police is the front for the Mumbai underworld in that sense. Okay, it's a nexus between the financial markets, the underworld, politics, and Bollywood out there, largely. Because why? Because Bollywood is a fantastic money laundering business. With all the bills you rack up and the amounts you pay and things like that, it's fantastic to whitewash money, which is why there's a very close nexus out there. All of this was coming home to roost. And mind you, just like in Kashmir, and I know Professor Sengupta and I disagree on this, where deconfliction should have already happened. It's already too late now. It's already 3 years now. You've lost momentum. In the case of Mumbai, absolutely none of the problems have been sorted out. If you remember, it was the channel that we detest, which caused a lot of casualties and deaths and deserved to, have some of their journalists rot in jail. Something called that rhymes with a prostitute, if you look at it in, if you pronounce it a certain way. That particular channel was, it did a special scoop 2-3 years later on coastal defenses, and they went into Coast Guard boats where the Coast Guards were just sleeping because all their equipment was non-operational and things like that. The high frequency surface wave radars that Sri Lanka installed that ultimately helped them destroy the LTT smuggling network, and it gives you kind of over the horizon 24/7 coverage of the sea around you. Unique technology. We never invested in that. You still haven't sorted out the the thing between your Coast Guard and your Navy properly. You don't equip your Coast Guard properly. You still give this stepmotherly treatment to the Coast Guard. Intelligence is not acted upon. For example, your Pulwama was a classic case of intelligence failure. There was intelligence which was never ultimately pieced together. We go in for placebo attacks, and we believe the attack solves the problem beforehand. I have a piece on it today. I mean, within 800 words, there's limits to how much you can write. But we learnt no lessons from it. That NSG plane sitting on the tarmac for hours is symptomatic of our system and our compound incompetence, our refusal to learn lessons. And mind you, something like this is going to happen again. It's only a matter of time. All the conditions are ripe for something like this to happen again. So, it's, and that's what makes it even more tragic, that we never learn from our own mistakes. I can't hear you. You're muted.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
I think we can agree that it's going to definitely happen again because there is active. I don't know why they're called sleeper cells, because they are very active. planning something like that. Very recently, we saw the ISIS. Was it the magazine, the annual, the monthly magazine, which had a decapitated Shiva
Dabik.
statue?
Yeah.
Let's go after those who worship false gods, which is the idolater.
Mind you,
Yeah.
when this attack was happening, I never thought of the Hindu terror angle. But now so much information has emerged between Parambir Singh disappearing that phone, these guys buying kalavas to, pretend that they're Hindu, some of them being uncircumcised, surprisingly, which I did not know could happen with Muslims. Having fake IDs saying Samir Chaudhary and whatnot. Uh, it was such a dastardly thing. And yet, I still remember the emotion at that point of time was sheer anger at the BJP. Surprise,
Hmm.
surprise. Do you know why? And in that election in 2009, I did in fact vote for the Congress. And I'll tell you why. Because the first thing was their opposition to the nuclear deal at that point of time, which for me was borderline treason. It was should have been lined up against against a wall and shot. But the second thing was, whatever the failures of the government, you don't attack it the way the BJP did,
Hmm.
exploiting it. Remember, there were Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh state elections 2-3 weeks after that, or something like that, or 2-3 days after that. I forget. But you don't react that way. In that way, the BJP reacted exactly the way Rahul Gandhi behaves, which is why Rahul Gandhi is such an intensely dislikable commodity.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, I think that's a lesson for all politicians also, that when the nation is faced with something that is a trauma of on this scale, the last thing that the public wants is politicization. The public is wise. It can see things for itself, and knows exactly what's happening. And there's a way to act. I remember during the, of course, unrelated, it wasn't a terror attack, but it was also devastating, were the floods in my home state of Uttarakhand in 2013. And Prime Minister Modi, till then, had been a chief minister of Gujarat for me, who was successful, who was doing well, who was popular. But when he came to Uttarakhand and he actually stood there and helped, and took people back from his state of Gujarat and tried to offer his help in any possible way, I know it moved me tremendously. So there is a way that politicians can act in these situations. Professor, Abhijit makes a strong point about the Mumbai police, and I really want to even talk about, while I agree mostly with him, is Tukaramji, who laid down his life. And had he not, apprehended Kasab or intercepted Kasab and taken that same bullet, which eventually killed him, it was very likely that Kasab would have been identified as a Hindu.
There are various kinds of responses to this particular attack. The most glorious response was basically the response of the Taj Mahal hotel staff, who, in putting themselves at tremendous risk, shepherded all their guests to safety. The hotel manager lost his family and he was at work the next day. That is a response that is sterling. That basically brings out our character,
From
particularly it brings out the character of the Taj Mahal staff. And no amount of words, no amount of praise is sufficient for that. Come what may, you can do whatever, you can throw whatever at us. We will get back to work. You can't defeat us. That, I think, was the response of society of the city of Bombay at large, the Taj in particular. Now let us look at the responses of the police. If your top policemen are taken out in a matter of minutes in the first attack itself, then something is seriously, seriously wrong. And we know, I think we can agree that it's seriously wrong. But that's basically where the officials, the officers being taken out. But you had Jawans who threw themselves in harm's way and they were armed with practically nothing. And here was Tukaramji, who again, I was not surprised to hear that he was an ex-army guy who, risking his life, sacrificing his life, ensured that at least one of them would be caught alive. How can you describe that? that you cannot describe at all. This is something the unimaginable. But luckily we have such people, and that is why India survives. Let us
Yeah.
now look at the political response. There's two kinds of political response. You see, this the political response and what Abhijit says, seems to me somewhat perverse.
Hmm.
So here you have an attack where the attackers, if all had gone well, would have either not been caught at all, or if had been caught, they would have been identified as Hindus. And of course, the right wing would have been tarred with such a brush that no amount of years would have been enough to take that paint off. It would have been proven otherwise later, but the fact is that taint would have been impossible to wipe off.
Hmm.
Now, there has been a security failure, and I agree with Abhijit that this mirrors the security failure that took place when in Amritsar people did not shoot those tires, and that's a standard response. I remember reading Frederick Forsyth's Blackbird, and this was written in the
Hmm.
80s, where a Russian plane Aeroflot is hijacked, and wherever it is hijacked, wherever it lands, a soldier shoots off the tires. So the plane is immobilized. You don't place spikes for a very simple reason that you can be threatened later on to take those spikes away. You disable
Hmm.
the aircraft. But those SOPs, unfortunately, were not with our security forces. So I can understand that 10 years after the hijacking occurred of the Indian Airlines plane, that in Bombay we would be similarly disadvantaged because we would not have any SOPs. Okay, fine. But after that, if you look at the political response, one set of response was to tar the BJP with this, to say, look, this was basically an attack carried on by right-wing activists, a false flag attack, and look what they've done. And of course, that was tried, it didn't work out, thanks to Tukaramji, who held on to this particular guy. But the other
Hmm.
thing was that this was a failure. And let us face it, the opposition parties have the right to point out to a particular failure if it has failed. See, the reasons why the BJP lost was the BJP was trying to become another Congress. If you remember, prior to that, Advani, or around that particular time, Advani ji had gone to Karachi, Lahore, where he basically praised Jinnah. So he was basically trying to be another Congress, trying to write his names in the history books, trying to, in a sense, de-radicalize himself, appear mainstream, where he also compared himself with Obama. It was a party that had lost its coherence. I believe his loss had nothing to do with the Bombay attacks. The
Yeah.
parties
In fact,
in Rajasthan.
Professor, I feel a lot of people shifted their positions, in terms of ideologically,
Absolutely.
because of these attacks. It worked in a very, very kind of, internal way.
No, I don't think the attacks work to shift positions. If you look at the trend in those particular elections, the BJP was losing anyway. So, in a sense, it had no coherence. And let us face it, Modi not taken over the party in 2013, rest assured, it would not have been the BJP would have come to power. They would have come to power in a majority, which would have been a mess. It is Narendra Modi who takes up the party, again gives it coherence. Now, he puts it in a position which is recognizable to its voters, and also because he spins such a campaign, he pushes his record in Gujarat, and as a result of which, he is able to win much of the floating votes as well. But that was
Hmm.
a bad time for our country when the major opposition party and the party in power were both trying to be woke. And when you
Hmm.
have both parties trying to be woke, and remember, the coalition of parties, the coalition of interests, or the coincidence of interests, was the starkest during Anna Hazare's movement, where both parties in parliament passed a resolution, look, parliament is supreme, you can't have a guy agitating outside telling parliament what to do. We know that. We knew that. But let us leave this aside. You see, if you look at the government response, you had, and the opposition response, prior to that, You had Advani saying in 2005, Jinnah was a great man, blah, 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 blah. And he had to quit the party presidency. He also ensured that the party would not be led by somebody able to actually pose a challenge to the Congress in 2009. Then you had the government. From this, there was an extremely tepid response. I knew that because subsequently you had a declaration, joint declaration with Pakistan, where you said, look, Pakistan also suffers from terrorism, in a sense hinting that if they are causing terrorism in India, we are also causing terrorism in Pakistan through Baloch terrorists, etc. We went totally woke. We went totally woke. Aman ki asha, etc., etc. Now, there is a way we could have gamed this to our advantage. We did not game this to our advantage because, unfortunately, we actually started to believe it. That was the mindset Indian policy makers had. And let us face it, practically everybody regrets it now. You have Manish Tiwari saying that, we should have come up with a firmer response. You have Shiv Shankar Menon, the foreign secretary, also saying that we have come up with a stronger response. He said nothing all these while. A decade has elapsed since 26/11. Now you are saying that there should have been a stronger response? See, we had gone woke and Pakistan took advantage of it. It was the response of society which righted Bombay in time and the response of individuals like Tukaram Umle who ensured that we had evidence to prove that there was Pakistani involvement.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, and I think also you make an important point about I want to delve back into this whole narrative that was also being kind of fed about, and one of our viewers brought it up. So thank you. Was this remember that photo op with all these people standing with a book that said RSS ki Sajish 26/11? There was a concentrated effort to link this to the RSS. Abhijit, I want you to come in on this.
So look, the thing is, we knew there was a concerted effort to, bring down the BJP at that point of time and the RSS. The Malegaon blast, where we still don't have any concrete leads whatsoever. People spent years in jail, careers were destroyed. Colonel Purohit was tortured, Pragya was tortured. Conviction kahan hua hai? Nothing. What is the evidence? Nothing. A lot of it was done by the Mumbai police itself, which we know was completely compromised at this point. Mind you, we had known the Mumbai police was compromised for a very long time because Dawood Ibrahim, who was responsible for those 1993 blasts, was Chachere Bhai and the train blast. Was Chachere Bhai and whatnot, huggy duggy with half the police force and half of Bollywood at that point of time. There are still pictures, if you go on the internet, of him kuchikuing half of Bollywood in Sharjah. And we all know that, police officers' families used to get these free tickets to Dubai to go to Sharjah and watch matches and crap like that. Now, of course, Sharjah has, ever since Sharjah became Sharia compliant, nobody wants to go there. But in those days, Sharjah was not Sharia compliant. So everybody used to go there and watch matches. And that is where most of the, the money laundering and thing used to happen till Dubai took that over. The good thing about Dubai is that they're very open to sharing this information with any law enforcement agency that wants. The fact that India still does not cooperate with UAE intelligence in the way American, British, and other intelligence agencies do tells you a lot about what is happening even now in our intelligence agencies, right? So here's the thing. When a terror attack like 26/11 happened, you've still, again, a BJP government who was I believe was the primary target to be taken down in that entire this thing. There were meant to be two casualties. It was meant to hurt India and it was meant to hurt the RSS BJP and eliminate them from the scene for whatever this thing. That party, when it comes to power, does nothing about it, that is truly shocking, right?
Hmm.
So this kind of, frog in boiling water mentality, it really needs to go at some point. But there's a second trajectory in all of this. That particular book, RSS Ki Sazish, was constantly part of the Congress campaign, sometimes even undermining its own government, to create this, keep fostering this narrative of Muslims under threat and Muslims being persecuted. Remember, Batla House had happened, and what did Salman Khurshid say? That, I showed the photos to Sonia ma'am and she started crying. I mean, Salman Khurshid did a lot to, undermine his own government on the Batla House
Hmm.
episode. Na? So there was a lot of things happening out there. The entire polity had gone woke. That said, we should also recognize that the biggest beneficiary of 2008 in that sense was Modi, because his strongman image in Gujarat,
Hmm.
for better or worse, and his absolute stern refusal to apologize for any of it, gave you this contrast.
Hmm.
Now, when you come, on one hand, you have this contrast of this man who probably wasn't able to manage riots, but gave the impression, he allowed the impression to float that he had somehow micromanaged it. It certainly didn't hurt his credibility in any way with his voter base. On the one hand, combined with the incompetence and the sort of blatant jihad normalization, terror normalization that the Congress was doing on the other, combined with the sort of clumsy politics that the BJP itself was doing at that point of time, all of, and mind you, Rahul Gandhi came from the school of Digvijay Singh.
Hmm.
He said just a year or so after that attack, he met, the US ambassador, and said Hindu terror is a greater threat to India than Islamic terror has ever been. So
That
it
was WikiLeaks, yeah.
consolidated Modi's image. It also consolidated Rahul's image in that sense, which is why I
Hmm.
always say that the BJP was always a 120 to 140 seat party. Modi took it to a 220, 230 seat party. Rahul Gandhi made it an absolute 272 plus, or to quote his mother, 272 plus party.
but, I think Abhijit again feels that this was something that was poorly handled by everybody who had a platform at that point of time. It was unprecedented. It's urban warfare. It's not something that we have necessarily seen happening. I want to ask both of you, and Abhijit, especially because you track terror so closely. How vulnerable are we today, 13 years after uh, this attack? And Professor, to you, uh, ISIS Kashmir. You sit in Jammu. You've spent many years in Jammu and Kashmir. I want you to talk a little bit about that as well. So first, over to Professor, and then I guess Abhijit.
Look, ISIS Kashmir is still, in my opinion, is something amorphous. To frighten the life out of somebody, I can basically take images of the ISIS, send an email to somebody, and he will be scared out of his wits. As to whether ISIS has actually set up shop is another matter altogether. Look, by and large, if you look at it, ISIS has set up shop in places where it has been able to occupy. Okay. So when places that came under its occupation, that is places of Iraq, Syria, etc., are places where it has been able to recruit. There is no place in Jammu and Kashmir which it has been able to occupy. There is also no safe haven like Nuristan, say, is in Afghanistan, where a group like ISIS would probably not be threatened. Now, of course, it would be a different matter altogether. So you need some kind of a safe haven. That safe haven is just not possible in Jammu and Kashmir. Yes, individuals may be attracted to ISIS. They may, read online material. They may take guidance, and if they get recourse to a revolver, which is not very difficult to get, they may do certain things. But I think as of now, what we have to fear in Jammu and Kashmir is conventional terror. The terror that has been going on, the terror which is now taking different forms, that is what we have to confront. ISIS per se in Jammu and Kashmir is not a problem at all. If I wanted to create mischief, I could basically take an ISIS flag or take a black background, do some scribbles on it. Everybody will think that's Arabic and send it to a reporter and said, I so and so from Daesh, I'm sending it to you. Daesh for an ISIS activist is a pejorative term. Basically, it means people who basically slit throats. Daesh has been used by the French purposely. No self respecting ISIS member would call themselves part of the Daesh. So much for ISIS, which at this point in time is basically being overrated, at least when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. Other parts of India, perhaps not so, because you have people from here actually going to ISIS managed territories, possibly coming back. We don't know. Not so in Jammu and Kashmir yet. But what will be our response to terror? Look, after Pulwama, you did a Balakot. Prior to that, you basically did a surgical strike. The fact is, unless you are able to target the infrastructure of terror, somewhere how you do it, that is basically what you are supposed to do. We are not supposed to tell you how to do it. Until such a time you are able to target the infrastructure of terror, unless you are able to transform the system of benefits and punishments so that the person who plans this particular attack is punished, he is hurt, you are able to hurt him when he does these attacks. Till such a time, I am afraid these attacks will continue. See, who are we killing? Who are we shooting? We are shooting soldiers of the Pakistani army. Well and good. Does it help the top officers and the top bosses? Does it hurt them when they go about plotting their attacks? The fact is, it isn't. So we are hitting somebody, well and good. You have to show a response, but it still does not strike those section of people who are carrying this out, who are planning this out. And until such a time, like the Israelis, we are able to put the fear of God realistically and credibility among those who do this, I'm afraid these attacks will go on. And the terrorist has to be successful only once. You can ward him off. You can create your defenses. You can ward him off, but he has to be successful only once. And if he success only once, he is successful, you have failed.
You're right. Abhijit, we discussed urban warfare, and we're thinking about what kind of attacks are going to come to us next. Ajit Doval recently talked about civil society being a front now, where this sort of divisiveness can be seeded. Yes. And basically, I think he didn't go all that far into saying what the consequences are. But certainly, if you don't want to spend the money because it costs money, it costs planes, it costs ammo, all of those things. If you don't want to spend the money, one of the things that you can do is seed, this kind of anarchy, lead to situations that can result in civil war, and have people going at each other. I think that is something we hear often about Pakistan, about killing them, what is the 1,000 slashes or etc., whatever their agenda is. How realistic do you think this sort of terror in the future is?
It is the future. Okay, it is the future, because remember, urban warfare has repeatedly proven to be extremely useful. Remember, in the first Chechen war, the Chechens decimated the Russian army by dragging them into Grozny. Everybody thought that because they had tanks and the Spetsnaz and planes and everything, the Russians were going to win. They went on dragging them into Grozny and then destroying them. Remember, this is also what the Red Army did with the Germans in Stalingrad and Leningrad. They went on dragging them into the city and destroying them. Now, what we see out here is offensive urban warfare, where you are going into somebody else's city and wreaking havoc based on the fact that the police are uncoordinated, there are no plans in place, you don't do training, nothing of that sort, right? Remember, the attackers, they all had AK-47s, and what did people like Tukaram Omble have other than, danda?
Please.
Right. At best, they would have had those 303. I remember at that point of time, my mom had a security detail, and those police guys were armed with 303 bolt, Enfield World War I bolt action rifles. What do you do in circumstances like this? So we hear a lot of talk. I've heard Doval talk about this NGO civil society threat to India. But what is actually being done about that specific threat to India? Okay, there are things you can do. One of the things that they have done, which you have to give them credit for, is cancelling FCRA licenses left, right, and center. Okay, now FCRA license cancellation is one thing. What is the second part of it? What are NGOs aimed at? They are at capturing the media narrative and the narrative in general. You see zero effort. At least the Vajpayee government, they had somebody like Pramod Mahajan who used to keep coming out and, boom, 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 boom. If there was a fake news story that day, by the evening, he would have destroyed it worse than a Rottweiler mauls a 3-year-old child. Today, you have a PMO that is run by Pomeranians and Labradors. Rottweiler ki to baat hi chodo. So what do you do in such circumstances? Did you see Rana Ayub's interview in Hard Talk with Steven Sacker? Oh, I get trailed. I feel that I'm outside of India and I'm getting tracked. Oh, look at me. I'm so brave. There have been attempts at assault on me, this and that, but I've survived. All going unchallenged. Nobody wants to talk about those 670 tapes that she made, which Shoma Chaudhary and Tarun Tejpal go around telling everybody in private are all fake and there's nothing in them. Have you ever wondered when News Laundry was still okay? I mean, the only person okay at News Laundry is Madhu Trehan. When she asked Rana Ayub to give those tapes, she said, no, it's copyright of Tehelka. Tehelka, then Shoma came out and said, no, they're hers. She can release them whenever we want. And to date, nobody has seen that.
No one's heard those tapes. Yeah.
Nobody's heard those tapes. Okay. Same with her visit to Kashmir. We don't even know if she went to Kashmir or not, because to date, nobody has seen photos when she claimed she went with that New Yorker reporter. So, where is your media management? Okay, you don't have to be like Putin, crushing down on NGOs and destroying them and throwing them in jail, accusing them of treason and all of that. But you at least need to have an apparatus that combats all of this.
Yeah.
They don't even do that. So what are you left with at the end of the day? See, for me, this is just an empty speech, because you understand that there is a threat, but what are you doing to counter that threat? Okay, nothing. You run very transparently weird things like the Times of New York or whatever that weird organization picked up on. And mind you, when they picked up on genuine fake operations like Times of New York or Times of Timbuktu or whatever that were carrying pro-India stories that nobody read, they also attacked ANI in a very sketchy way, which was in itself a propaganda operation. If you remember, I did a long thread about that attack on ANI, which never added up, because it was such a confused... So remember, there is hybrid warfare happening. Urban warfare is one part of hybrid warfare. And we are just as unserious as dealing with the NGO civil society media narrative as we are unserious about dealing with the actual urban warfare element of it. You tell me, when is the last time you heard about urban warfare drills taking place? None. I remember when I was there in Moscow in the 1980s, early 80s, there still used to be nuclear drills every year and things like that. You had to go into, you had to find your nearest bunker and go in there. Fine, you don't have to mobilize the whole of society, but are you at least telling people? You waste so much money telling people on radio, on a Hindi radio station in an English ad, that you can get rural toilets on subsidy, but you're not telling people actual information that would be useful to them. In case you are given this warning, please stay indoors all the time, please do not come out, you leave it for the last minute.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not even arming your police, you're not creating SWAT teams across, you don't have standard operating procedures kept, you've still not sorted out the center state relationship on certain kinds of things. You saw that recently in Bengal when BJP, after the election, BJP workers were being raped and killed. There was still a jurisdictional issue, which is the
Mm,
same kind of jurisdictional issue that happened in this thing. So what do
mm,
you do? Nobody takes it seriously. Everybody, Congress or BJP, they're very happy to exploit it, but nobody
mm,
actually wants to deal with it.
mm, mm.
Uh,
Professor, often intelligence failure is blamed every time there is a terror attack. But how difficult is it to also gather intelligence? How much cooperation exists between agencies like the MI6 or say FBI, CIA, I'm sorry, and India and Indian agencies? What sort of cooperation do we have, and what can we expect from them? Because the dynamics, as you've seen post COVID, the world is moving towards a certain bipolarity, whether we like it or not. One is, of course, the China camp, and the other is the American camp, or democracies vis-a-vis these sort of quasi democracies slash authoritarian regimes, all gravitating to one side. In this sort of an environment, with the terror scenario that we have, and what many people say we're heading towards a Cold War like scenario again, maybe not that extreme because we are too economically tied up with each other now to really block nations out like that. For example, the Americans and the Chinese, I mean, they're their biggest trading partners. So it's not going to be easy for that kind of a Cold War situation. But how does that impact the intelligence gathering mechanism?
Look, I think Abhijit would be better placed to answer this, but I'll say this, that I think vis-a-vis the Americans, I think our sharing of information must have vastly improved. I remember in the 80s, whenever we would complain about Pakistan and give them some information, they would pass it on to the Pakistanis. Our assets would get exposed, tortured, and killed. I believe that no longer happens. But when it comes to the Canadians, when it comes to the British, it appears to me on superficial evidence that our trust in those intelligence agencies are somewhat low. One reason, of course, is that you see the open activities, the seditious activities that have taken place in the United Kingdom, where some separatists organized this particular referendum on Khalistan. They also have tried to do similar things in Canada. They have been doing it for a long period of time, and neither government, in a sense, has done anything to curb that. But again, this is something that I think Abhijit would be better placed to answer. But I will say this one thing. Abhijit talked about urban warfare being the future. Actually, we've seen this in the past. You know, in the 70s and the 80s, it was precisely what the KGB was doing in the capitals of Western Europe. This entire business about the campaign for nuclear disarmament that went on, etc., which was so ridiculous given the fact that you could see it's the Soviets who had built the Berlin Wall, and you are basically railing at your own government. So, when you get woke, logic goes for a toss. You basically work yourself into some sort of a hysteria and you say a lot of things. I remember an interview taken by Helmut Kohl. This CND campaign was going on, and he tried to persuade Willy Brandt, to come in and say certain things, and Willy Brandt would not. Now, look, so this is something that has happened before, and I believe what is happening is being taken out of the copybook. Grozny, Stalingrad, urban warfare, in a sense, has happened before, but that's war territory. But of course, if you want to do true terror, there is copybook for that. The Maoists are expert at it. This skill can easily be transported from red to green. Not a big problem with that. See, when it comes to media management, I will say this. During Vajpayee's time, it was better because Vajpayee, in his own way, had also managed to keep, all the channels open with several media houses. They could be against him, for him, but there would be somebody in those channels, one or two persons in those channels, in those media houses, who would try to carry positive stories. So it was a much more diffuse picture. Today, the polarization is there for all to see. Two
Hmm.
things. We are lucky that one section of the media, in a sense, is so discredited that no matter what it says against the government, and some of
Hmm.
it could be true, even if they say it, nobody will believe it. So, in a sense, the government is fortunate that things have come to such a pass. They are blessed with the quality of their enemies, and the quality of their enemies in this case is pathetic. But remember, each media house also has its own faithful. That faithful believes whatever that media house tells you. And if you have a critical minimum mass of people believing the fiction against the government when the fiction is false, you therefore, in Mao's words, have created the water in which fishes can swim. So, anarchists, terrorists, therefore, after some time, will find the space to hide themselves in these particular sections. And that is why I think media management is extremely important. Now, for certain reason, unavoidable reasons, I can understand the PMO's reticence with the media, because the media, he believes the media never gave him a fair chance, at least a section
They
of the
didn't.
media. But
They
in
didn't.
a, yeah, they didn't. But the fact remains that this is what you have to work with. Okay, you don't want to work with the media, then get a Arun Jaitley or some other guy to work on this particular media and to ensure that their coverage is more balanced. Secondly, the media that is supporting you cannot be a one person show shouting things all the time. It must also inform. Okay, you're flying the flag, I understand that. That sells. But you must also inform. You fly the flag for 2 hours in a day, but you can easily create spaces within your media where serious discussions take place. Serious
Yeah.
discussions about policy, serious discussions about Indology, serious discussions about society, where you are able to educate the public on a host of things. If you
I
look
think
at the
I think because these channels run primarily on ads, and I think YouTube is where these kind of conversations are more likely to happen. I mean,
true,
I kind of need to wrap up now, Professor. I need to get onto a TV channel at 8 p.m. So, but Abhijit, last question, and if you can make it quick, is what about bio warfare? There's a lot of talk about COVID and its origins, and increasingly, bio warfare looks like a reality. And I mean, back in the day, from our parents' generation, we heard about turning the lights off and diving into bunkers because planes were flying overhead when we were at war. We of course were not born then, so didn't experience any of that. But in the future, bio warfare seems to be a far more likely scenario than anything else.
It's probably the most likely scenario now because China is basically giving you proof of concept. Now, remember, in all of these things, it is the media that acts as the dampener and uh, uh, the kindling that fans the flames, as the case may be. Notice how they went out of their way, including Facebook, Twitter, and all of these things, to suppress information about the Wuhan labs and things like that. The same way, like all these channels were playing along with the RSS Hindu terror narrative and things like that. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you are. Hybrid will be one more part of it. Remember, bioterror is also, in a sense, urban warfare. It is both economic and urban warfare combined. Where does a biological weapon spread, or at least a communicable weapon spread the best? It is in a dense urban environment, not in a rural environment. So you can treat bioweapon as essentially a classic capitalist weapon which kills off the people without killing off the infrastructure, which makes it a plum thing for you to just absorb.
Yeah.
So remember, it doesn't matter what you do, it is your media control and management. Now remember, the point of having daily briefings the way Pramod Mahajan used to is you don't have to have a good friend in that particular TV channel. The access and the denial of access itself acts as a signaling. Okay, so for example, if you don't like a certain TV channel, you deny access to anybody who advertises with that channel. Okay, that's a very powerful weapon. It's a perfectly democratic weapon. I mean, nobody can accuse you of being undemocratic at that point of time. Of course, these days they expand democracy to mean everything under the sun. So, even the right to eat banana ice cream and the fact that quality does not produce a banana ice cream is apparently a violation of your human rights these days. Of course, I'm being hyperbolistic, but you know where this is going. There are lots of ways to do that. They don't do that. They don't apply their mind. They've got a very rural, samosa chai chaatwala mentality on dealing with the economy, with the government, with everything like that. And, it'll win you votes because you can communicate with 90% of this country that is essentially a agglomeration of blue collar laborers and white collar, quasi white collar who are practically blue collar in a sense. But remember, those people don't control the historical narrative. The historical narrative, and this is even STEM never controls the historical narrative. If you look, human history is a litany of the humanities controlling science, not science controlling humanities. Right? And this is why they really need to up their game. They don't get it, and God save us. Mute, you're on mute.
On that note, here's wishing for a safer 2022 and the rest of 2021 for all of us. We're a month away from the new year, and I cannot believe that it's already been 2 years since COVID has been in our lives. And we actually thought it was something that would go in 6 months. But guess what? There's a variant in South Africa right now, which is causing a lot of concern. It is allegedly the most mutated version of the virus, and they are yet to analyze and see how vaccine efficacy works on this variant. It doesn't have a name as yet. That's how fresh and new it is. But it's caused enough alarm for the British to close their borders and a few other countries to do the same. So stay safe, stay masked up. This is not behind us in any measure. Please do go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. And please do like, because then that means more people will get to watch this very important conversation where I think we touched on all these aspects without being too political or going after PM Modi or the PMO, although I think Abhijit did slide that in at some point, but he has to. So that's about it, and have a great weekend. And do watch Illegal. It's on Voot. It's my show. The sense that I've written it, and it's now streaming live on Voot Select. And we've been getting some decent reviews, so it's been a good week. So thank you so much, and we shall see you soon. Bye. Bye, everyone. And I'm on CNN News 18 next. So bye-bye.
News 18, okay, ठीक है, on करो News 18, देखो क्या